You know, I think Republicans clearly want to redistrict their way out of electoral problems next year. But if they make a bunch of districts sort of like moderately red and get rid of blue districts, I'm not sure that's really going to be the panacea that they think it is.
Yeah.
I think there are a couple of messages here that might, if you're in Indiana, for example, you're probably like, I don't really know about this.
Yeah, trying to make yourself impervious to defeat is a bad strategy because everyone knows what you're doing. The doubts among Democrats don't really matter much. Those are to be expected. The growing doubt and discomfort among independents, that is a deep concern. The fact that a lot of Republicans are beginning to ask real questions, like what is the deal here? The terrorists were supposed to do particular things, like is perhaps the biggest concern. I think you can read the tea leaves in a bunch of different ways. You can see all manner of shapes in the clouds, and you can read it in ways that are good for Democrats or bad for Republicans. But I think however multidimensional all of this is, there are fewer and fewer universes in which this doesn't start to look like Donald Trump being somewhat of a drag on his party, whereas before he was undeniably the wind in the party's sails. It's not clear who else could be the standard bearer for the party, but it is clear that there are real questions about his ability to lead the party into the future and past the midterm.
It is often the case that when something happens, Trump targets the entire community. But in this case, 59 individuals brought to justice or will be brought to justice over this alleged fraud. But now everybody from Somalia should be kicked out of the country?
Yeah. Look, the categorical denunciations are bad. It is also the case, and this isn't qualifying it in a way that abdicates Trump's responsibility for having said it, although he isn't the most sophisticated communicator. Charismatic, sophisticated, not so much. This is how we talk about race and ethnicity in this country. We do a lot of categorical denunciations. For a very long time, it was all about kind of black lives and whiteness and what whiteness does. No one should be shocked that this is how we're talking about Somalians in this context as well. And I think in general, if we were to move away from that kind of categorical nonsense, it'd be a little bit easier to take on board the condemnations of the president in this context, as opposed to having to just kind of do it when it's convenient for us. So that's the first thing I'd say. But again, I do think that responsibility for this sits with the president. He ought to be a hell of a lot more careful. It is completely inappropriate to condemn an entire community for the failings of a particular community, but the failings of particular people in the community. But the failings of those people are real. And the actual scandal here is genuinely egregious. And there are lots of political actors who ought to be condemned. And I do think that we do ourselves a disservice when we don't try to interpret this in a way that allows us to both condemn the categorical statements here that are, again, irresponsible and wrong, but also acknowledge there is actually a real controversy here. There's something that ought to be addressed.
I think that everyone acknowledges that this is a real, not only a real controversy, it's a real criminal case, and these people are being tried. However, Trump is basically saying, he literally has said they don't contribute anything. They should go back. We don't want them here.
I think what he said was that people who are complaining, et cetera, and who come from these bad countries, that they are bad and we don't want them here. Again, I think that's how most people who support the president are going to interpret this in a generous way.
But this is really the latest panicked scapegoating because Trump is in real trouble in a lot of areas. He fell asleep 4 times during this meeting, by the way, which is raising even more questions about the energy level.
Having your ass kissed for hours could be a little boring.
Apparently, we've got the war crime situation. Voters increasingly know. He said he was going to bring prices down. Prices are not down.
In fairness, though, this is the deflection that I'm talking about. There is a legitimate issue here.
Any instances of fraud is not prosecuted.
The failure of Minnesota officials who actually permitted this kind of nonsense to take place.
That's not why Trump is talking about this.
That is precisely why people are talking about it.
The governor of Minnesota, who did
40% of the arrests and convictions on Medicare fraud across the country is from Cuban-born immigrants. But that is a community that, by and large, supports Donald Trump and that Donald Trump likes so much. So he wouldn't think, it wouldn't occur to him to say Cubans are garbage, and I don't want them here.
I'm just not sure that that kind of speculative conversation is as valuable as having a particular conversation
there's nothing
about.
speculative about what I just
if I could
said.
say,
This is
well, you're
facts.
speculating about what he would do with respect to Cubans. That is
Have
explicitly
you ever
speculation.
heard him talk
objectively.
about
He's
Cubans?
doing it.
This
He's
is
not
again,
talking about that.
we're
It's not
getting
speculating.
derailed. That is still speculation, whether or not he would in general. This specific circumstance, however, does merit some attention. The Times wrote a very great, exhaustive piece. One dimension of it that we haven't talked about here is the fact that racial justice and unique concern about people being condemned for discrimination is one of the reasons why this fraud wasn't identified, pointed out, and better policed. That is a really interesting, and I think for people on the left who helped agitate
Sure.
for a lot
But
of
what
those
about-
issues, that actually helped
But Kmele,
create this
we got to go.
particular
But what
problem.
about the fraud that's perpetrated by just white people? Are
I
we
think
just
all
afraid to
fraud
condemn
is
white
generally
people because
bad, and we should not
we're
be
afraid of
condemning
that
people
too?
on
I
the
mean,
basis
look,
of their
there's
ethnicity or
fraud
race.
that
That
is
is wrong.
happening, and a lot of this COVID fraud was not identified and dealt with. So
Yes.
this is not a unique situation
Yeah.
to Minnesota. Everyone, thank